Hi, I'm Dave Roberts and this is Angling Escapades. Hi, welcome to the River Wye, and I should say a rather flooded River Wye. We've had the last week, we've had an incredible amount of rain, and just yesterday the river was over where I'm stood now, so incredible how quickly this river can drop when it does. But it's still very dirty, but it is dropping. So even though the river looks horrible and you perhaps wouldn't expect much to happen, there's still plenty of fish to be caught when it's like this. These barbel don't mind, and what I'm going to show you today is that that's possible, and I'm going to show you a slightly different way of catching them, hopefully. And yeah, I think, you know, prospects are good. It's not gone too cold, so I think with the extra water now, these fish will be starting to look for the natural food in the river, and you know, we should have a chance of a barbel or two. Firstly, though, I would talk about safety. I think there's a misconception that rivers, when they're like this, are just completely dangerous. Obviously, they are dangerous if you fall in. But what I would say is that when the river is up, I mean, this river now is probably 10 feet above its normal winter level. The river's actually coming to us, as opposed to you know, another day or so you'll have to scramble down the bank to get near the water, and that in itself is far more dangerous. At least like this, we're on top of the bank. There's nothing, you know, too much that can go wrong. I'm not scrambling up and down the bank, so it's actually quite a safe place to be. As long as you're careful about how you set your gear up and what you're doing, you shouldn't have too many safety issues. The other thing to check, obviously, is to know your river and know what it's doing. Now, I know this river's dropping and it will continue to drop during the day. It would be different if it was rising. If it was rising, one, there's a chance the river could come up too high, come over the banks, or also on our access points we could get cut off. So you have to be very careful, and you've got to make a measured decision as to whether you're going to fish. But I am completely happy that this river is safe. Where I'm stood, where I'm sat, where I'm fishing is safe. So for actually catching fish, though, obviously then the second most important thing is swim choice. Now you can see here we've got a peg that's I've got a really nice slack. If you look out into the middle of the river, and that's horrendous, you know, you wouldn't be fishing out in that. But here I've got this lovely slack, and it's between these two trees, which create a natural sort of, it's not even a backwater, it's just a very slack piece of water. And I know barbel live here, so I really fancy that we could catch them here. And you've got to bear in mind as well that, you know, with 10 feet of extra water on, these fish will be going in and out of the flow. So it's not a case of dropping it off the rod tip into the very shallow water. I like to get out into the flow as well, as much as you can, because these fish, I say, will be starting to move around now and take advantage of these high water conditions and the natural food that's being washed around. So, as I said earlier, I'm going to do a slightly different approach today, which I'll show you now. So we'll go and get some bait sorted and some gear sorted, and we'll show you what we're going to do. So when the river's like this, obviously the first thing you're going to turn to is feeder tactics. There's not much to be caught on you know, float tactics, and it's all about, when the river's like this, it's all about keeping your bait nice and still, and giving those fish chance to find your bait. However, what I'm going to do today is something slightly different. As you can see, I've got set up here, I've just got a pole set up. Now, before anyone thinks I'm just trying to be gimmicky or do something, be different for the sake of it, there is actually a reason for this. One, it's a method that I love fishing. I've fished on the river before, and it's completely exhilarating. I love it. People have this sort of misconception that you can't catch barbel on pole and it's reckless. It's not at all. As long as your pole is strong enough and your equipment is balanced, then it can be one of the most exciting ways of fishing. But there's also a sort of a tactical advantage to it as well. If you imagine now, this river is 10 feet above its normal level. So we're sitting right up here on top of the bank. Now, below us then there are various plateaus as it goes down to the actual main river bed. Now, if I'm fishing feeder, I've got the feeder I cast out, and I've got a certain amount of line that's sort of moving around in the current. And obviously on the edge of these banks there's trees and lots of debris, and I also know on this peg there's actually a platform here that we normally sit on and fish. So I'm putting myself in danger. If I hook fish, I've only got a sort of a 14-foot rod, and the angle of that going down to the water is always, you know, it's always going to create an area where your line could rub. By fishing pole, and fishing pole feeder in specifically, we are able to drop the feeder directly off the pole tip right onto the riverbed. And then we're holding that. There's a lot less line out. We've literally only got the amount of line between the pole tip and the riverbed with the feeder there, and it's in a straight line. So what that does is it cuts out the amount of drag on the line. If we hook a fish, it means we're playing the fish underneath the pole tip. And also it cuts down the amount of resistance on the line. So obviously with a river like this, we've got trees, we've got leaves, we've got all kinds of branches coming down, bits of weed that's died off coming down. The more line you've got up, the more line you've got cast out, the more that will gather up on the line. Whereas with having that direct line, only a short piece of line direct to your feeder, cuts out a lot of that. So it actually enables you to fish a lot lighter feeders and things in such flood conditions. So it's a really good, interesting way of fishing, and I hope we'll catch a few on it today, just to sort of, you know, dispel the myth that you can't do it, and also that it's reckless. So the setup is quite simple. I mean, firstly, the pole itself, you need a strong pole, obviously, but there's loads of margin poles on the market, you know, cheap margin poles. You know, there's probably, you know, £300 or £400 is the most you'd pay for a margin pole new, and there's loads second hand. You know, it doesn't need to be a specialist piece of equipment. We're not fishing at long, you know, 14-16 meter length. So as long as it's a good strong pole, it's plenty. So that's my normal margin pole that I use for carp fishing, and all I've got basically is I've got a length of line through the top 4 sections. Okay, now this is my normal main line that I'd use if I was feeder fishing. Okay, just the length of that. I'll go back to the tip section. Obviously I've got a very strong elastic there. That's actually a 17 hollow. Okay, so it's very, you know, it's got a lot of stretch in it, but it's a good powerful elastic, a good heavy elastic, because obviously I've got the extra weight of a feeder on there, and hopefully the extra weight of a barbel too. Coming down from there then, I've got, that's just an old flat float tip. Okay, that's just an indicator. Now let's be honest, if I hook a barbel on this, I'm not going to be wondering if I've got a bite or not. Okay, it's going to hit the pole hard, but I just like to put that on because I like looking at a float as opposed to a tip. So that's there for a reason. Obviously if we were fishing for bream and roach and other species on which this pole feeder is very good for, then you need the indicator, but that's just there for my own personal preference. So then coming down then, really my feeder rig is exactly the same as I'd be using for normal feeder fishing for barbel. Okay, so I've got a big cage feeder there, okay, with added weight on, and that's just running on a bead down to a stopper bead there, and then I've got the normal twizzled loop, and that bit there is important to me for any type of feeder fishing. That's giving me a buffer zone there where, you know, this feeder can cause a lot of abrasion on your line, so that doubled up line there is very important. Okay, it also creates that stiff bit and it keeps it away from the feeder. And then coming down then, I've got my hook length of about 2.5–3 foot, not too long, and then on there I've got a usual sort of knotless knot with a hair rigged bait band, and that's my setup. And obviously I'm going to be adding on sections as well and fishing further out in the flow. And I imagine if I'm hooking barbel and landing barbel, I'll be fishing with, you know, I'll be landing them with another couple of sections on to allow for the stretch of the elastic. So a simple setup, very robust, but should do the job nicely. So bait for today. Obviously when the river's like this, you know, as I've spoken about before, nice smelly baits, you know, lots of attractants, what have you. So I'll be starting on ground bait. I'm going to mix up some ground bait now, and then I've simply got some halibut pellets, some hemp, and my usual chopped up meat. Okay, and I'm just going to put all of those goodies into a ground bait mix, and I'm going to fish mainly ground bait. I've got the option I can switch to my meat feeder, same on the pole as I normally do, and fish that later on, but that's going to be my sort of that's my bait for today. So, and I'll just probably fish little sausages of meat on my hair rig, like so. and we'll see what happens. So I'm going to mix up some ground bait now. So this doesn't need to be a terribly complicated process. Anything with hemp and halibut in, you know, it's still the flavour for barbel, you know, especially in these conditions. So this is my favourite mix. So it's just a case, I'm not going to use a full bag today, just half a bag. And these ground baits, these halibut ground baits, you know, whatever brand you use, they have got lots of bits and pieces and big chunks in them, and it's just ideal for this sort of fishing. So I'm not going to be too fancy about it really. I'm just going to mix in a good amount of water. Usually a couple of applications of water and it's job done. There we go, so a bit more in there. You're basically looking for a good stodgy mix, and with this I don't even need to riddle this, if I'm honest. It's just a real sort of binding mix, which is just going to put lots of attractant and draw those fish into my feeder and into my feed. Now what I do is I leave that for 5 minutes now, let it dry out a bit, and then I'll add in my particles and other bits just to make it the finished mix. Okay, so I've let that dry for 5 minutes now. So all I'm going to do is just add in a few pellets. Again, all the flavours that barbel love, halibut pellets, plenty of those. I just want to pack this as full of bait as I can. Real good amount of hemp in there, and then a good handful of meat as well. And then if I mix all that around, plenty in there. If you mix it vigorously, you get any lumps out. I say the odd with barbel, I don't find the odd lump harms really. It's just all adding to what's hitting the bottom. So now I've got ground bait full of pellets, hemp and meat, as well as all the other attractants in there. And this is a mix that's good enough. If I wanted to ball something at the start to kick us off, I could ball it up and throw it in, but all I'm going to do today is introduce some feederfuls to start with, and then sort of just build it up, because as I say at this time of year really it's not so much about laying a bed of feed for me. It's about, you know, getting some nice smelly baits that the fish are going to find, and in water like this where you've got a natural slack, I imagine that the fish will find that quite easily. We won't have to put a lot of bait in today, hopefully, to get bites. So let's go and get started. Okay, so I'm all set up, I'm ready to go, got all my bait sorted. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to start by just putting 2 or 3 feederfuls out just where I want to fish. Now I'm going to fish off the edge of this bush here. It's actually quite a confined peg here, but I'm just going to fish. I don't think we'll have any problems, because I've found when I've been pole fishing for these barbel before, they don't you don't have too many problems with them swimming out of the peg, because you're fishing directly on top of them and you're trying to pull them up off the bottom, and they're more concerned with staying on the bottom than running off for miles. So that's the theory. Hopefully it'll be right. So all I'm going to do is just fill my feeder up quite loosely to start with, because I'm only feeding. I've got a cable tie on the pole which I just hook the feeder over, and that just aids shipping. So what I do is put my other sections on, get back so I'm at my required length, and just tip the pole over so the feeder swings out. And what I want to do is I just want it nice and steady, and I'm going to lower it in as close to the bush as I can get it, because obviously there's a bit of a fall because of the flow that's on. So I'll just lower it in the right place and just feel it right the way down till it hits the bottom. Boom, there you go. And all I'll do then is just give it a couple of quick flicks like that. Okay, so that's emptied out. Same again, nice full feeder, just to get some bait down there over the cable tie. Drop it off the cable tie, just get it right in the right place, and lower it down. Follow it down to the bottom. And I know from fishing here before, I'm fishing on gravel there, which is quite important this time of year. It's not gone cold enough yet for the fish. The fish like feeding on gravel. So I'm just going to give that one more, I think, just because I think, you know, the rivers, when the river's like this, you can be even more attacking. You know, get some bait down. Something for those fish to home in on. So again, over the cable tie. And I say you could start your session by balling in some ground bait, but this is a nice, real accurate way of hopefully bringing the fish to us. So again, just dropping it into the quiet place, lower it down. Boom. There we go. So now I can put some bait on and start fishing. So I'm going to start on a piece of luncheon meat. I could use pellets, you know, anything that I've got in there. I could also use, you know, live baits, worms, maggots, bunches of maggots. But I like to think, you know, because we're only targeting barbel, that a nice big bait is what we need. If we're fishing for bream or big roach or anything like that, then obviously you'd use a lot more natural baits, hemp, casters and worms and chopped worms and things like that. But for today's purposes, just a nice big chunk of meat, so we can really, if we get a bite, it should be something decent. So, manoeuvre it into place. I just want to make sure this lands in the right place. So just what I do is I just steady the bait down by just putting the hook bait on the water, and then lower it in. Follow it down. There we go. And then what I do is put it into my rest, like so. I just want that indicator just to be just above the surface, just so I've got something to watch. And everything's nice and stable. Ooh, there's a bite straight away. Look at that. That's incredible. That is incredible. They were straight on that. So you can see the barbel has come straight under the pole tip, really. So now I might need to add the section on later on, but I'm just going to come back to my normal length, to my unshipping length, and just have a look where the fish is. Just trying to keep it out of that main flow really to start with, and then see where we end up. The barbel's trying to get out into the main flow, so just keep the pole nice and low. Just let the elastic do the work. And as soon as I can, I want to really get on top of this fish, because I want the fish to be concentrating more about staying on the bottom than running off out of the peg. Because as we know, with the way barbel are, you know, the shape of their body, they want to be on the bottom, and they don't like coming off the bottom. See, at the moment it's in front of us, it's not going off anywhere, it's just more, the barbel is more worried about staying on the bottom. And what tends to happen is you'll see as time passes, as we go on, that you'll see that you start to get more line coming up higher in the water. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add on another section. Just to counteract the extra stretch of the elastic. There we go, that just gives me a bit more control then. You see, the barbel is concentrating on getting down to the bottom, it's just pulling down all the time. It's not going sideways, it's not running off out of the peg. You can see the feeder now, so that's close. And it's in the net. How about that? So what was that, 2 or 3 minutes? I'll probably play them as long as that on a rod and line. And I say, barbel just don't really seem to know what to do when they're hooked. on a pole. Yeah, not a massive fish, but you know, in a river that's flooded, that's a brilliant result straight away. That. What a great start. Okay, so we've had 3 barbel now. It's gone a bit quiet. Starting to lose the light a little bit as well now, so I'm just going to switch now finally to the method that's been catching me so many fish recently, the old meat feeder. Exactly the same, just fishing it on the pole, that's all. Nice piece of meat on the hook. Let's see if this gets us a result to finish off. Well, there we go. Not the biggest fish in the world, but the meat feeder got us a bite at the end. So what a fabulous little session that's been. Really enjoyed that. I say, in conditions, you know, not great, not ideal, but it just goes to show these barbel will feed in this high water. And fishing pole feeder, all right, not conventional, not for everyone's cup of tea, but very effective. And when you get these, especially the bigger ones, on this pole tackle, truly exhilarating fishing. I've loved it. I don't think I'm going to get another cast though, because it's getting very dark now. I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.